one of the problems that Britain, I think, has had now for well over a decade is, when was the last time that a politician ran in a general election making the case that actually things were going to be a bit easier and a bit better and there were no more hard choices to make?
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Michael Simmons, the Spectator's economics editor, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Kate Andrews, my predecessor, who's now over in the US for the Spectator, and we're going to have a look at what's been going on in the economy since she left. Kate, welcome back to the UK.
It's great to be back, Michael. Good to see you.
You've obviously been out in America running the Spectator's expanded US operation and our new office, and you've sort of left the British economy behind.
I wouldn't say I've left it behind. It follows me wherever I go, not least because it's not really a meme, is it? But it's becoming a meme of Keir Starmer standing up, addressing the Commons, and Rachel Reeves crying behind him has cut through in America. That photo is going everywhere. I had one American message me saying this photo might come to define the state of modern British politics. And from the reporting that you've been doing, Michael, which I've been following so closely in order to keep up with my UK economy information, there isn't a lot of good news, is there?
No, it's not looking good. And in fact, today, I always think, 1 week I'll have a week where there's not another bad release about the UK economy. But this morning we had a pretty terrible one from the Office for Budget Responsibility, who of course do the scoring and decide if the headroom and the fiscal rules are being met every time we have a budget, as you know. But today they released their Fiscal Risks and Sustainability Report, which they basically look at three areas which contribute to Britain being goosed. One of those areas is obviously debt. We know that debt is running at near 100% of GDP, and it's been going up and up and up since the pandemic. They said today that by the 2070s, it could climb to something like 270% of GDP. Now, one of the problems they particularly highlighted as why we're having to borrow more and more and more every year is our old friend, the state pension and the triple lock. What did you see they say about that?
So it appears the OBR is now predicting that the triple lock on the state pension is going to cost 3 times more, about £15.5 billion a year by 2030 than originally estimated when it was brought in under the David Cameron coalition. I'm realizing how much we're smiling right now, and it feels so wrong for the topic.
It's just so good to see you. You've been away for months.
I'm so happy to see you, and I also want to do our wonderful producers proud. But it doesn't feel right, does it? Because it's all pretty harrowing information. So the state pension is, as frankly expected and has been warned about for well over a decade, is completely unaffordable. It is not something that can be sustained into the long term. It's something that during the pandemic, ministers who were concerned about fiscal responsibility did want to look at. That included at the time former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. And actually there was a conversation in Number 10 about it, but even then they couldn't bring themselves to make change. And critics of you and me, Michael, will say, well, if you look at the state pension, it's still not that generous. And I think there's truth in that. If you are somebody who does not have a lot of other income to supplement you, it's not making you wealthy. You're not having a great time living off it. But the fact that it's going to everybody and the fact that we've promised it to future generations, regardless of their income, regardless of how well they've done, this is fundamentally not sustainable. So, you have a situation, and the triple lock is the perfect example, where problems that have been accumulating in Britain for many, many, many years now remain the same, but they're just getting worse. And post-pandemic, when the UK has taken itself to the brink of what it can afford, with all investors and all market eyes on the UK, especially after the Liz Truss budget, especially since Labour has not been able to even do £5 billion worth of welfare cuts, it means that these very generous promises, frankly, and these very expensive promises are going to be highlighted even more as unaffordable. And at some point, something's going to give. Politicians never want to be the one to make the cut. They never want to be the one to have to take drastic action. And I think this game is going on in Britain and elsewhere in the world. It's certainly true in America too, where everyone's just hoping that the debt bomb doesn't explode on their watch.
And sticking on the point of the triple lock, now. People like you and I have been pointing out not just the economic and fiscal problems that you allude to there with the lack of funding for the triple lock, but also the generational unfairness of it. Do you think now that more and more people are actually realizing how much of a problematic policy it is? I mean, you've been writing about it for years, but in my mind, maybe a couple of years ago, it would you would mention, by the way, this thing is going to cause us a lot of problems down the line, but no politician would ever consider going near it because it's electoral suicide. But do you think we're getting closer to a point where, every month we have terrible public sector finance figures, we've got this warning from the OBR today? Do you think eventually a politician, whether it's someone in government or one of the opposition parties, is going to, have the cojones to say, we have to do something about this policy?
Never say never. I would love to believe that the great reformer will come along. Who cares what party it's in? Someone just has to come along and say, we have to readdress this. And we have to do it in a fair way. We must protect the vulnerable, but we have to have sustainable systems. Increasingly, no, though. I don't think anyone's going to come forward, because look at which way the wind is blowing. I mean, if I'm looking at the opinion polls in UK, and reform seems to be doing better and better and better. There are lots of very understandable reasons for that. They're willing to speak bluntly and clearly about issues that Brits have been saying for years now. They take issue with and politicians have largely ignored. But if we look at the fiscal side of those public policy promises, granted, they have time to put the numbers on it and to come up with something that's costed. But we're looking at some pretty populist policy here. I mean, it's about a lot of spending. It's ideas about not servicing the debt, believing that might be possible. It's ideas about tax cuts while not actually addressing some of the far more expensive public policy promises. I'm really not convinced anybody wants to have the really horrible and ugly conversation. And that has to be had, because the UK is just overspending to such serious degrees now. The fact that no politician is even able to really try at the moment to talk to the electorate or their own MPs about returning to pre-pandemic spending levels suggests that we are still in this phase where the public thinks the government can do everything, should do everything. We're still not in a phase of talking about trade-offs. And I really don't see that changing for a while. I fear the situation gets worse before someone has to talk about it.
And the OBR, warned exactly what you've just said there today as well. They pointed out that, look, if you wanted to stabilize the growing debt, you would need to reduce borrowing by something like 3% of GDP to get it down to a level where you can, start maintaining the debt, not just growing it. But in the next line, they say, despite this, as if it's obvious to the whole public, the public expects more and more from the state in terms of responding to emergencies and what they expect through benefits, etc. If politicians, live in that reality and decide that they're just going to continue to ignore what is obviously this fiscal time bomb for a few years down the line, what actually happens? Does this end up with the bond market saying enough is enough and we have to go to the IMF for a bailout? I mean, how does this end?
We don't know. We don't know how bad it's going to be allowed to get, and we don't know whether or not there would be a political intervention before that happened. In the U.S., I mean, a couple months ago, you already saw the U.S. credit rating getting slightly downgraded. Slightly short, but markets are watching, and nobody really knows when time is going to be called. That's part of the problem with having this conversation is, you can be at risk of making these grand predictions a bit too early and saying, well, it's all going to explode, and then people are going to get really badly hurt because you're not going to have the time to restructure without people really losing out. I mean, similar arguments can be made around healthcare and the National Health Service. I mean, I would argue we've already seen that breakdown when millions of people have struggled to access basic care for months on end. That wasn't enough of a breaking point, really, to make fundamental change. It was enough that Labour was able to get elected saying we are going to make some very serious change and reform the NHS, and it's not a sacred cow anymore. You've seen a shift in narrative. You haven't seen a massive shift in public policy yet. So, it's a terrifying question to ask, how much worse does it have to get? And I really don't think anyone has the answer. It's very clear that the UK and the West are on unsustainable trajectories. This is all very negative. Michael, is there any good news coming out of the UK over the past couple months?
Well, I was saying this earlier, that it would be great to come into work and you say, here's some brilliant story that Rachel Reeves done something right, or that the economy is turning a corner. And I think the problem is, wherever you get a bit of economic good news, it always seems to come with, well, actually, this is bad in the long run. So the two examples are, in fairness to the Chancellor, the start of the year has seen better economic growth than had been expected. But when you sort of look at beneath the figures, talk to economists, it's effectively all sort of front loading because of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. So businesses and consumers, were worried about what was going to happen later in the year. So they just brought forward this activity, earlier. And as a result, the expectation is that we'll not see that growth continuing into the second half of the year. The other bit, which surprises me that Labour are not singing about more, is that wage growth over the last 10 months, I think, has been stronger than it was under the Conservative government. And again, that's, clearly is good news for, the British worker. But it's bad news for if you're a rate setter on the Bank of England, right? Because you worry about the knock-on and potential inflationary effects of that. And then also, because this is something that comes out of the ONS, there's a lot of people who think, do we even really believe this data anyway? So I think those are the two bits of good news, but they unfortunately come caveated.
We'll still take them.
Yeah.
The UK is becoming a bit of an international case study, and in the secondary better way. I have to say, in America at the moment, the UK's got a pretty good reputation.
Okay.
And the government in particular, and I do think that's because they secured the trade deal. Is it a comprehensive free trade deal? By no means. It's not even close. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Have tariffs still risen? Yes, they have. But I think it turned out to be a pretty decent deal for the British consumer, who's going to be getting more American goods at hopefully cheaper costs. And also, it just became the first country to be able to sit down at the negotiating table with Donald Trump. And overnight, Trump has laid down the law with these letters to South Korea, Japan, other countries saying, I'm going to slap massive tariffs on you if you don't negotiate with me in the next 3 weeks. There's a reason that the dollar is doing quite well over the past couple of hours compared to, say, the yen, and that is because they don't believe that countries like Japan are going to be as successful at negotiating with Donald Trump. The fact that the UK negotiated something, it's gone down pretty well in America. So tick for the government. But if we go to the primary case study that's taking place, and I think this is like one of the crucial questions right now, why borrowing costs are so high for Britain and why they're higher for other comparable countries that are also having a serious debt crisis. I think part of the problem is that Labour, maybe to its credit, has actually tried to make small, incremental changes to Britain's spending habits. It tried to cut a couple £billion.
But the backbenchers have stopped them delivering it.
And I suspect that it is worse to have tried and failed at the moment than to have not tried at all. And that doesn't mean that worse moments aren't coming from other countries when it's clear that they're not trying or they also try and fail.
Sure.
But the fact that the UK has so publicly, over the past couple of years, under different governments, tried to make certain kinds of changes and failed to do so. This happened under Boris Johnson's government as well. There was an attempt to hike national insurance, pay for social care. The funding was greenlit. The tax hike was undone. These attempts to try to just not eradicate the deficit, not tackle the national debt, just to make minimal change haven't gone so well. And so you then pull all eyes onto you in those moments of failure. And in many ways, that's unfair. But I do wonder if that means that the UK is becoming this case study and might bear the brunt of market punishment earlier than other countries.
Yeah. And crossing the pond again, looking at America, is Donald Trump, even though, as you've just said, we've done okay out of this trade deal, is Donald Trump about to make it much worse for everyone with his big, beautiful bill? That there's worries about how much debt that America has to refinance. If the international bond market freaks out about that, will that, one, be a problem for Trump in America, but two, will that spill over to make our borrowing costs even higher still?
Interesting politically at the moment. So a lot of people feel that the signing of the big, beautiful bill on the 4th of July was really the trigger.
You've got to say it in the voice.
I can't do the voice. It's fantastic. That's all I can do. No, the signing of the bill on the 4th of July triggered the start of the midterm elections.
Sure.
In 2026. The idea being that half of America genuinely believes that this is going to be Donald Trump's great legacy, that he's going to secure his 2017 tax cuts, that you are going to see economic boom, you're going to see more growth and investment in America. I think the right really does believe that, but the Democrats are convinced that this is a gift from Donald Trump to campaign against him because they think you're going to see all the negative repercussions potentially that come out of the bill.
But could it be I'm not remotely comparing that these politicians are similar, but could it be a Trussonomics moment where it's something that, comes from your belief and you think it's going to set the economy gangbusters, but ultimately it's unfunded and the markets don't tolerate it?
It's definitely unfunded, and that's been the big debate amongst the right in America. The fact that it's expected to add $3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade, it's going to add immensely to the national deficit. This has been the debate on the right. One has to wonder how much has already been factored in. So as I said, the U.S. had its credit rating downgraded a couple of months ago with the big, beautiful bill already on the table. And so you have to wonder how much the market has already factored into that. People like Elon Musk, it's been made incredibly clear in this debate the lack of fiscal responsibility that's gone into this bill. So I think that information is out there. There is going to be less of a surprise aha moment that happened with Liz Truss when her chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng stood up and announced things that had never been briefed. That's not the case with what's just happened with this bill. But I think you're definitely right to worry more broadly that despite having a reserve currency, as America becomes even more fiscally irresponsible, that obviously has a knock-on impact on the rest of the world. I also think that these trade negotiations and these tariffs, they're probably a bigger part of that right now.
Sure.
I think there's growing concern in classic Trumpian style as he just demolishes normality in the way that these negotiations usually work. To what extent you can really hold Donald Trump at his word anymore, because we have this latest delay in the reciprocal tariffs, which are nothing of the sort. You have some quite strange negotiation tactics going on. The success of Donald Trump, particularly certainly in term one on foreign policy, is because you didn't know what he was going to do. People often did come to the table and negotiate. I think what's worrying actually for the president and for the American people in this circumstance is since he backed down off of those tariffs and he's delayed them, and it's becoming increasingly clear he hasn't got any other trade deal apart from the UK over the line in this time. Can you really believe him when he says he's going to slap a 40% tariff on whatever particular country he chooses that day? We saw what happened back in April when he tried to do this the first time. He had to pivot. He had to U-turn. I think it's this uncertainty. And then, of course, if he does do it, the ramifications for countries, if these tariffs go through, what it will mean for their trade policy. I mean, American importers are not going to be buying as much from abroad. They're not going to be able to afford it. So whether it happens or doesn't happen, that uncertainty is obviously going to be felt everywhere.
Sure. And finally, if we can look at another country on your side of the world, at the end of last year, Kate and our head of TV, Natasha Froese, travelled to Argentina to interview the chainsaw-wielding President Milei. Now, in the last few weeks, there's been some pretty impressive economic numbers out of Argentina. I think they've had really impressive GDP growth, and also his abolition of rent controls, as Thomas Sowell would say, would do, has basically made a massive difference to how much properties are available and has brought down rents. Is he offering the model that we maybe need in Britain to fix our economy?
He's certainly offering a model of success. Very difficult to say all the ways in which you could replicate it, not least because Argentina had experienced sort of the ultimate collapse, right? I mean, a lot of the growth we're seeing, and it is so impressive, year-on-year growth in the second quarter is up by over 7%. He is making good on the promises he made to his voters. A lot of that is because there's so much room to bounce back, Sure. But, things like abolishing rent controls, I think in real terms, the average rent has fallen by 40%. In Argentina, homes are affordable again. The pretty basic recipe for free market economics is proving to work very well in Argentina. I don't think you can apply every lesson to the UK or the US, but you can certainly apply what not to do. I mean, you've got some real personalities, including President Javier Milei in Argentina, and a very likely new mayor in New York, Zoran Mamdani, who's talking about bringing in further rent freezes, upping rent controls. Again, we're talking about bread and butter basics here, what to do, what not to do. I think there will be comparisons to be made. Milei had, I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because he had to do some really painful things, but the fact that inflation is now back to normal in Argentina when it was off the charts, we can't even fathom here in the UK or the US, despite the deep pain that people went through with double-digit inflation, what that experience would have been like. He's certainly offering a recipe for success in implementing pretty basic free market economic policy. I mean, I say that. I feel like the UK at the moment could do with a little bit of help or guidance from policies on other sides of the world. I don't know. I mean, what do you think is so desperately missing from sort of UK policy at the moment? What are the big mistakes that are being made? And what are the easy wins? Are there easy wins left?
Well, this is the thing, right? I think it's exactly what you pointed out earlier. It's that Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, know that we need to either rein in spending or realistically, unfortunately, raise tax on the majority of people. But those are two things that, one, they don't want to do, and two, the Labour backbenches are not going to tolerate. I wonder if this is, an example of where you can't apply Argentinian economics. Is one of the massive things he's done to, get back in control of monetary policy, bring inflation down, is huge austerity, is getting rid of whole departments, really reining in spending. And maybe it's just impossible for us to get to a point where something drastic like that happens without us reaching a true crisis point first.
I so fear that you're right, because who's going to let the Labour government do it if they wanted to? And that's a big if. MPs are not going to let them cut. That's very, very clear. I don't think at this point you can continue to raise tax in the UK without some punishment from voters.
Sure.
I think that, especially because they were so explicit in that manifesto that they weren't going to be that frightening tax-raising kind of Labour Party.
And by the way, I think on the tax point, the public should actually shoulder some of the blame here, right? That the public is broadly supportive, not of austerity, but of increasing taxes. But the second question in polls is always who should be taxed, and it's never me. Right. So, either policymakers, governments have to be prepared to deliver a true austerity message, or the public that wants a growing state has to accept that means they individually pay more.
I don't want to exaggerate or overstate this. I don't think that the UK is looking like Argentina pre-Javier Milei by any means yet, but politicians do have to be so careful, because once the markets really turn on you, you've got nowhere else left to turn. And one of the problems that Britain, I think, has had now for well over a decade is, when was the last time that a politician ran in a general election making the case that actually things were going to be a bit easier and a bit better and there were no more hard choices to make? I guess maybe you could say 2019 with Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't think that was really the vibe of the election. Sure. I mean, I think certainly coming from Jeremy Corbyn and Labour, it wouldn't have been hard choices for them to bring in full fat socialism. Yeah. But it was very clear there was going to be a lot of change and a lot to stomach. When was the last time people were actually told, if we do these hard things, actually things can be okay in a year? Certainly not since the pandemic. Everything is hard choices. And so they have this narrative of things being so difficult, which they are, but at the same time, they're hiking spending. They're spending more and more. They're at their highest levels of tax and the narrative and reality do not match up. And so I think people are very tired. I think they're exhausted of being made to feel like, we've got to get through the next thing. Yeah. But unfortunately, they don't actually take all the hard choices they need to when they craft that narrative, they put the country in an even worse position financially. So I think, when crunch point comes, people are going to be pretty angry.
Well, on that cheery note,
it's still really nice to see you, Michael.
Well, it's so great to see you back in London. Hopefully it's not so long before your next visit. But Kate, thanks very much for joining Spectator TV.
Thanks for having me.